Okay, y'all, is the New York Times top 5 fiction books of 2024 worth your time? Yes and no. Just like last year, there are 3 titles that I think are strong, and I totally understand why they're on that list. And there are 2 titles that baffle me. I don't know if they inspire as much distaste, maybe disdain, as last year's list, but they do confuse me and in some ways frustrate me because I think while my reading experience for 2024 was varied, and there were quite a few reading slumps, I will say there were quite a few good books that were published in 2024, and yet 2 of the titles in this list that were chosen to be like honored, yeah, honored, were not good. Uh, Period. So let's get right into it. The first one that absolutely should not be on this list, You Dreamed of Empires. Listen, I, I have joked that, like, am I part of the literacy crisis? Because I don't know if I understood what was happening in this book. And listen, I am well on my way to like full himbo status. There are only probably like 2 wrinkles in my brain left, but generally I can hold my own. Like, not the brightest light bulb in the box, but like not an idiot. And I didn't get it. I didn't get it. And I also didn't enjoy it. I didn't enjoy my reading experience. I don't think that there was anything that I took from it. And in fact, I only finished it because I wanted to talk about this list online. And I felt like it was only fair to be able to truly talk about it and have an opinion if I had finished it. It's the only reason I did. Listen, I get it was supposed to be some sort of kind of like hallucinogenic sort of exploration of this period of history, but I would argue it didn't do it great. It also owned the fact that some of the names were complicated, that the author was intentionally using, certain Spanish words that maybe even native Spanish speakers may not know. But all of those things contributed to the like lack of grounding that I felt throughout the entire work, and not in an intriguing way. It didn't feel like the hallucinogenic aspect was done or employed in a way that made me feel like it was like artistic. Does that make sense? It just felt like it so missed the mark, in my humble opinion. Um, I also feel like some of the English names were Wile E. Coyote, and like maybe the intention was to be funny. And in that way, sure, I guess it was like a nice chuckle. The only redeeming quality was I did feel like anytime there was a female in the room, that is when I gained clarity. And I do feel like that the women were written very intentionally. And I think that that was an interesting kind of like employ. But even that wasn't done often enough that I felt like it made up for the rest of it. Does that make any sense? I could literally talk for days about how this just like did not work for me on any level. And I'm really disappointed it was on this list. I just think that there were so many other strong titles that could have or should have been included. Now let's talk about one of my absolute favorites from 2024 that I was so happy was on this list, and that is Martyr. And if you've watched any of my content on any of my channels, I cannot shut up about this book. I loved it. It's like a queer coming of age, but in middle life. And it talks a lot about life and love and the exploration of kind of like why we're here and how we got here and grappling with our past and coming to terms with that. I really loved it. And there's something about this book too that what I really took away was the feeling that I got when I read it, which I think is so unique for a book. And it felt reverent every time I sat down to read it. And I just felt so like it felt like communion when you're reading the work. And that was so powerful to me. And the ending is so magical and like unclear and complex. And if you read this book, you will want to first identify someone else who's already read it, because the minute you put it down, you're going to want to talk about it. You're going to want to have an in-depth discussion. What happened? Why did it happen? How? There, I think there's so many contradicting opinions about it, and I just love that, and it's so exciting to me. And yeah, again, like this is one of those books that I didn't take away like plot points specifically as much as I took away the feeling and the peace and the reverence and complexities of that human experience that I felt like we were being delivered through this work. Also, Kaveh Akbar, who is the author, is a poet. And girl, poets writing fiction, like more. It was so lovely. Such a lovely exploration of language and life. I could not recommend it higher. So that one, thrilled that it's on the list. Another one that I really was happy to see on the list, which I was not surprised at all, was James by Percival Everett. Percival Everett is incredible. If you are unfamiliar with his work or his other work, you should absolutely go check it out. The Trees is one of my absolute favorites. James is a retelling of Huckleberry Finn from the perspective of Jim, the enslaved person. And it's just such a unique idea. It's such a unique perspective. I think it takes kind of that idea that Barbara Kingsolver did with Demon Copperhead and just like really takes it to the next level and gives us this unique perspective on something that's, oftentimes rooted in these like very racist tropes and really gives us this like amazing retelling through this like modern lens. Um, I will say I do think that there are like little pieces of it here and there that worked better in concept than execution, but like I'm being hypercritical. I also feel like the ending, I liked it. I didn't like how we built there. I felt like it was slightly confined to the existing story, and being confined to that existing story, there wasn't enough of a through line to the build of the very end that made it resonate as strongly as I think it could have. Again, this is like absolutely hyper nitpicky. I think that the book is very successful. You should absolutely read it. It won the National Book Award, like, and. I just think it's valid to have critiques of even things that are brilliant and things that we love, not as condemnations, but instead as dialogue. Because I think by having complex conversations about art, we are able to like connect in these very unique ways. So I think by having a critique of something, that doesn't mean that we don't respect what it is and how successful that it is. And now I want to talk about another one that I don't understand. I don't get it. I don't get it. And that one is Good Material. I've talked about it on different platforms already, but the only reason I read this book was because it was on this list. I had mixed reviews on TikTok. Many people told me to skip it. They were like, gay to gay, this is not it. And they were correct. I, it spent, so the book is about a breakup, okay? And the first chunk of it, most of it, is from the perspective of the male partner. It's a male female relationship. And most of the book is from the male perspective. I was on board at the beginning. He was kind of downtrodden. He kind of, seemed very stereotypically cis straight in the way he moved through space and his emotions. And like in that way, I think he was written very authentically. It seemed to work. But the problem was he didn't go anywhere. And he didn't really run into any new situations that I would argue that would like challenge that approach. Instead, it almost felt like that approach was validated, which was kind of odd. And we just sat with him in that stagnant place for 250 pages. No, I don't I don't know who wants to read that. Like, where was the growth? And then we flip perspectives, and then the female half of the relationship comes in and kind of gives her perspective. But what was fascinating is that I felt like she was written very two-dimensionally. So then it makes me wonder, like, was the author in this relationship in her real life? And she was on the female side of this. It almost felt like she was like defending choices, right? Like it was very kind of like factual and two-dimensional, and like we were kind of defending choices and life and blah blah blah. So like that was interesting and didn't make it any more engaging because like she had written this one male character so well, even though he was completely insufferable and unreadable for 250 pages. But like, she writes characters great. Where was the female character in that? Like, where was the depth in the female character? Like, I don't know. And it was annoying. And then we get to the end, and like, the male character has like an artistic output that is of like his growth, basically. And it was clear that that was what was going to happen. He's this comedian, and they've been talking about this festival throughout the whole book. Many famous works have come out of this festival. It was like very clear that he was going to turn this breakup into this artistic output at this festival. Like, I don't think I'm giving anything away. I think it's, you know, projected very early in the book. But we don't get to experience the development of that. We just see kind of the output from her perspective. And like, cool, great, love that. But the interesting part was him writing it. The interesting part was him developing it. Like, where were the scenes where he's like trying different things? Where are the scenes where he's like, you know, overindulging in certain things, and his friends are giving him feedback in a way that he's like then sees and is able to reflect, you know, this like on his life through this artistic process. And you might argue that like that is too on the nose and that's too boring, and who wants to read that? And maybe you're right, but I know I didn't want to read this, and it bums me out. It bums me out. I think there were kind of some fun, interesting, like weird characters. You know, I think there were like little moments that were kind of like, oh, okay. But like as a book, it just didn't feel like it reached its potential because the way she wrote that male character was so good. He was so unlikable. But like, he didn't do anything, and he was unlikable, and he was like the main point of contact for like us hearing and getting the story like relayed to us. That's a pass. And the fifth title that I am thrilled was on there is All Fours by Miranda July. Now listen, this book is not without flaw, but the farther away I get from it, the more I'm obsessed. I went into this and I had heard that it was like about sex and like, you know, kind of tawdry and like wild. So I was like, okay, interesting. And I think it was shortlisted for the National Book Award. And some friends had been like, well, it's not very literary. So I'm surprised. And I was like, huh. So I was intrigued going into it. And through the first part of it, I was like, how is this shortlisted? And like, I was kind of agreeing with my friends, but also a little confused because like it was sexual, but it wasn't really about sex, if that makes sense. And then I got to the second part, and I like got the book. The book, regardless of what anyone has told you, is about the perimenopausal experience. And it begs the question, what would happen if you gave in to every erratic emotion and desire that accompanied that perimenopausal experience? And that is All Fours. And that makes all of the tomfoolery make sense. She is like supposed to be going on this like cross country trip to New York from California, and she only makes it like 30 minutes, and she spends an inordinate amount of money redoing this hotel room where she like creates this nest where she like takes a lover, but they don't have penetrative sex, and it like didn't make sense until the perimenopause of it all. And like, I think it's brilliant. And I think it's so brilliant that we're writing literature about that, that we're talking about that. Like, let's look back at the boomer generation and like all this like huge boom of divorce. All of that was happening in and around this kind of like perimenopausal growth, right? And I'm not saying that that's the reason for it, but I do think that this experience happens and no one knows how to deal with it. No one knows how to talk about it. It feels like someone's being irrational or erratic and it's coming out of nowhere. And it's like, kings and queens, like the what the body is going through is so wild. And I think that this just does such a beautiful job, and I think puts this beautiful lens on that experience, and helped me as a cis male who will never experience perimenopause like have so much more empathy and like grace and understanding for this, because like, wow. And like, yeah, of course when all of that stuff is going on, she's gonna create a love nest for her lover that like in a life that she feels totally stagnant and unfulfilled in. Cheers, Queen. Like good for you. You know what I mean? I will say there are moments of deep, deep cringe and like that's the only part of the book that makes me oh, um and I apparently and this is my first Miranda July, but I heard there's a lot of like dance and movement in a lot of her works, which cheers, go with God, love movement. But this lover or this like young man lover that this woman takes on like dances. And I think that that's one of the things that kind of like in entices her and I don't have the right word, but enchants her maybe uh to him, like because it's more than seduction, it's like different than that. It's like enrapture, like she becomes enraptured with him maybe from this movement, and like the way the movement's described is just so cringe, and to me that's the only thing that moves like outside of the like the perimenopause of it all. It just feels like, oh really, I don't, that's the one thing that didn't ring true. And maybe that's just me, maybe that's the male in me, and maybe as a maybe as a female you would have a different experience when reading that section, but like it pops up a couple times and like she brings it back at the end and I'm just like, girl, we, cringe. So that's the only thing that like I don't love, but go into it knowing that that's what it's about, and I think part one will just soar in a totally different way for you. Okay, top 5 books according to the New York Times from 2024. 3 are worth your time, 2 are not. You Dreamed of Empires, skip it. Good Material, skip it. Martyr, I wish I could buy all of you copies. Please read this book. James by Percival Everett. Yes, yes, yes. Everyone should read this book, especially after we've studied Huckleberry Finn growing up. Read this book. All fours. Yes, read this book. If you are a woman, read this book. If you are a man who knows a woman, period. So I hope that gave you all a little bit of insight into my opinions on this. Have you read these 5 books? What are your thoughts? I would love to hear what you all are thinking in the comments. Like, subscribe, share, tell all your peeps. And I will be back soon to talk more books.